Hi, welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is this thing called Cine EI from Sony's professional workflow for their cinema line cameras. To be honest, this topic is not for the faint-hearted. It is a deceptively simple concept, yet as it involves parameters affecting the exposure, many will find this a logical challenge due to the complex possible permutations as the shutter speed and iris values changes. Please help me out and subscribe to the channel. Every small kind gesture goes a long way. Here is how I will cover this topic. I will systematically break it down to several parts. Why should you consider Cine EI? How to enable Cine EI mode? What is Cine EI? Validate the claim. When and where to use Cine EI? Final thoughts. Let's start. Why should you consider Cine EI? The official answer to this question from Sony is simply quality. It promises to deliver the most optimum quality and performance for your video by ensuring the maximum latitude, aka dynamic range, and lowest noise. The key to this is by optimizing the ISO parameter. The ISO directly relate to noise level and latitude. With an optimal base ISO means you get the widest possible latitude, retaining shadow and highlight details with optimal noise level. Who doesn't want all these? How to engage the Cine EI mode? I will demonstrate using the FX30 as I have no access to other cinema line camera models. The FX30 provides quick access to commonly used settings from its 2 tabs main menu screens. Go to screen 2. Select exposure ISO setting at the top left. Select log shooting. You will see 4 options. Selecting either one of the last 2 settings puts the camera into Cine EI mode. What is the difference between these 2 modes? Cine EI Quick. This mode automatically switches between the 2 base ISO in relation to the selected EI value. Cine EI. In this mode, the user needs to manually select the desired base ISO. What exactly is Cine EI then? Cine EI is a Sony's technology applicable to their cinema camera lines. Therefore, this is targeted to a limited audience. For every Sony cinema line camera, it has a dual base ISO for its sensors. For example, the base ISO for the FX30 is 800 and 2500. In comparison, the higher model FX3 has dual base ISO of 2500 and 4000. Why 2 base ISO? Well, the literature says the lower ISO is for bright scene and the higher ISO for low light situation. Refer to the chart for the FX30 example. The position of the vertical bar shows how the latitude shifts at the corresponding EI. At lower EI value, you gain more shadow details at the expense of highlight. While there are already many literatures and videos covering this topic, one learns more when one teaches. This video is as much for me as it is for those of you who stumble onto this video. I shall try to simplify based on my understanding and hopefully it benefits other fellow enthusiasts. Cine EI is a workflow that deals with how you manage exposure in your shoots that uses log profile. The 2 important contexts here are workflow and exposure management. Exposure level is determined by the 3 parameters: shutter speed, aperture or iris, and lastly the ISO. In Cine EI workflow, you fix the ISO to one of the 2 base values. This fixed ISO is the fundamental concept that dictates all the dependency nuances related to this workflow. This approach harks back to traditional film making before the advent of digital cameras. Back in days of film videography, you are constrained to work within a fixed ISO value of reel of film. You cannot change or vary the ISO value on the fly in mid-shoot like how you can with a digital camera. A key challenge when shooting in log mode is monitoring the output during the shoot. The actual recorded footage appears dull and washed out. With Sony cinema line of cameras, you can apply a LUT to the monitor to visual in real time what the output will be like after color grading. This is extremely useful in aiding one to get the correct exposure and a key component in the Cine EI function. Now comes the interesting and confusing part, the EI. This stands for Exposure Index. It represents the shift of exposure latitude if the video exposure level is adjusted. The monitoring screen will visualize this change in real time if the LUT setting is set to on. If the setting is set to off, you will see that the recorded video does not change at all as the EI is changed. It is highly important to note that the recorded footage will always be the base ISO. The EI is only applied to the output on the monitoring screen. Post-processing color grading is needed to bring the recorded footage back to what is intended as per the monitored screen. Let me walk through a demo. Hopefully it can bring more clarity than simply talking about it. We will use all manual mode for complete control. With the camera in Cine EI mode, set the base ISO to 2500. And EI also at 2500. Set initial shutter and iris at 1/60th and f5 respectively. Turn off the monitoring LUT. This shows the actual recorded footage. Start to adjust the EI value up or down. Notice that the screen remained the same irrespective of the EI value changes. Reset the EI back to 2500. Turn back on the LUT. As I am using the default Rec. 709 color profile, the monitor will render the footage as if it is color graded to this color profile. Now, shift the EI to 1250. We can see the monitoring screen darkens and the exposure meter indicate an underexposed value of 1 stop. Next, lower the shutter from 1/60th to 1/40th, essentially increasing the exposure by 1 stop. On the monitoring screen, the footage is now properly exposed. However, the footage will be recorded with an overexposure of 1 stop. This is a very complicated way to shoot. So, is the quality promised worth all the hassle? To answer that, here are my own tests using my own copy of FX30 to validate the quality claim of Cine EI. Caveat: this is not a pro-level testing approach by any means. Claim number 1. Quality performance, especially noise, is equivalent between the dual ISO bases. Videos properly exposed. Shutter and iris are matched to give similar motion blur and depth of field. First video. Base ISO 800, EI 800. Second video. Base ISO 2500, EI 2500. To properly expose for ISO 2500, ND filters is deployed to reduce the light reaching the sensor. When viewed without magnification, I would say both videos looked identical to my eyes. However, if I zoom in by 400% at the shadow areas, indeed the ISO 800 is noticeably cleaner output, but only slightly. I would agree with the claim, they can be reasonably considered equivalent. Claim number 2. Shooting at base ISO is better at retrieving shadow details and less noise. I set up a high contrast test scene to simulate the shadow detail retrieval. First comparison, using base ISO 800. The reference video is properly exposed at ISO 200, shutter speed 1/50th and iris f4. In the Cine EI mode, the base ISO is 800 and EI 200, the shutter speed and iris remained unchanged. The metering shows the footage is properly exposed while the reality is the shot is effectively overexposed by 2 stops. Comparing the footage after color grading. Immediately obvious is the better shadow details, yet noise level remained very decent. Attempting to match the shadow retrieval on the reference footage will result in a less vivid output with reduced contrast and reduced color vibrance. Using base ISO 2500. Indeed, these test results are in agreement with the second claim. Claim number 3. Underexposing using Cine EI mode can recover otherwise overblown highlights. The testing parameters are as shown in the video's captions. Here are 3 comparison tests. Test number 1. Simulated overexposed background versus foreground. The reference video with properly exposed foreground will have an overexposed background. The Cine EI comparison is underexposed to recover the background highlights. It is quite noticeable that the foreground quality is significantly compromised. Test number 2. The standard matrix metering is tricked to overexpose the face, losing details. The underexposed Cine EI comparison shows recovered highlights, but its overall image suffers from reduced contrast and color vibrance. Test number 3. Bright sky. In the reference video, to properly expose for the foliage loses details in the sky. The Cine EI comparison show where this strategy is most advantageous. While the claim is true, admittedly, the mileage varies and probably should only be used if the highlights recovery is absolutely necessary, as the compromise to overall image quality is significant. After all the research, testing and real-world trials, when and where should one use Cine EI? The obvious observation is, while Cine EI promises the highest quality, its workflow is highly rigid and demands highly accurate control over exposure level for it to deliver the goods. To achieve a certain look and feel, ideally the shutter and iris needs to be kept constant to maintain motion blurring and depth of field respectively. Since the Cine EI workflow also fixes the ISO, the only way to influence exposure is by adding lights, i.e. artificial studio lights, or subtracting light via ND filters. This limits its use's settings where the light level can be reasonably managed and the absolute highest quality output is demanded. Such situations are in dedicated studios, commercials and moderately high-budget shoots. In a mobile and live settings such as run and shoot or street videography, one would not have the luxury of time to continuously adjust shooting parameters on the fly to match the changing lighting situation. Final thoughts. Cine EI is a nice feature, but it might be a little too cumbersome versus its potential benefits. Its quality difference, after all, is not exactly night and day in most situations. However, if you absolute must have the best quality, and you have complete or very good control over the lighting situation, it will give you what is technically the best quality that the sensor is capable of. Personally, the good results I am getting from these test field trips is encouraging. Like all things, practice makes perfect. I will shoot mostly using flexible ISO and sparingly using Cine EI when opportunities present itself.